Okay, so now we're just going to take a brief look at React with TypeScript. And there are some options when it comes to static type checking inside React. Initially, the only thing that was available was prop types. We would use property types inside React to declare the different types that our properties had, which is now considered legacy. And Facebook developed something called Flow to take care of the static type checking. Now, Facebook have not always had a lot of love for TypeScript, and it's only since React Scripts version 2.1 that they've actually integrated TypeScript into the developer build tools so that we can make use of it in React. It was possible to use it prior to that, but it would mean using a kind of extension to React Scripts that somebody else made. In this case, it was Microsoft. And the experience of using it with React was kind of sketchy. It would be a little bit frustrating, and trying to use it with Redux I found almost impossible and very annoying. But since version 2.1 of React Scripts, this is now a viable option to use inside a React project. Facebook have even included it in the documentation for React. So really there's two choices. Do you use Flow or do you use TypeScript? Now I've only briefly tried Flow once in the past, so my information may not be current, but research that I did, the general consensus is that people are divided, of course. Some people prefer Flow, some people prefer TypeScript. But what is factual is that TypeScript works incredibly well with VS Code, and Flow does not work so well with VS Code. And there are some complaints about its performance as well, and bugs that haven't been resolved. And the community in TypeScript is huge. All of the third-party libraries, or the majority of them that we use, will either have a TypeScript definition file included, or the community has created one and stored it on the definitely typed repository so that we can just install the types for the particular package we're using. So we're going with TypeScript for this, and I just want to run through a quick demo of how we use TypeScript in React. So let's see how we can use TypeScript in the context of our React application. And what I'm going to do is just export the interface for iCar. And I'm also going to export a const called cars. And I'm just going to set this equal to an array of car1 and car2. And we'll make use of this inside our React application. So I'm just going to go to the app.tsx file, and I'll just delete this stuff in here for now, just so we can focus on what we're going to look at here. And all I'm going to do is just create an ordered list. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to bring in the cars from the demo file. This is our cars array, and we'll just map over these, and I'll specify car, and then I'll just create a list item. And inside here, we can make use of our car object. And if I start typing car, then what we can see is the IntelliSense we get from using this particular object inside our TSX file. We can see that a car object has a car, a model, and a top speed. So the IntelliSense we get from TypeScript is automatically better. So I can specify just, let's say, the car.color in this case. And if I hover my mouse over these different elements inside here, we can see that TypeScript already knows that the cars array is a type of iCar array, and therefore the car object is a type of iCar. And what we can also see inside React is that our component has been given a type as well. This function, this arrow function here, has been given a type of React function components. And what we can also do with TypeScript, especially third-party libraries that provide their own type definition files, React does provide its own type definition file. And if we want to get some documentation about what this particular type is, then what we can do is just right-click and go to its definition. And this will bring up the TypeScript definition file for React. And anything with a file type of .d.ts is a TypeScript definition file. And what we can see that this has got a type of FC, and this type here is just an alias for function component. because it's being set to a type of function component. And a function component takes in a generic type parameter, and this is for properties. So each component can receive properties from a parent component. And if we pass properties down to a component, then we need to specify the type of properties that we're passing to that component as well. So if I go back to app.tsx, for instance, and supposing instead of just having a list item in here, I wanted to create a separate component that contained the details of the cart items. And in the source folder, I'm just going to create a new file and call it car_item.tsx. And inside here, I'll just create another React functional component. And I won't do anything with this yet, but I'll come back to it. So back in the app.tsx, what we'll do, instead of passing in a list item here, we'll pass in our new car item component. So I'll just specify car item. And sometimes things automatically import from VS Code, and sometimes they don't. And this is one of those occasions where it doesn't. And I'll just specify car item from car item. And what we want to do is pass down this car as properties to this car item. And if I specify car equals car, then immediately we see an error underneath the car item saying that property car does not exist on type intrinsic attributes. And intrinsic attributes is really referring to the properties that we're passing down to our car item. So what we can do over in the car item is we can declare the properties that this car item component is going to receive. So what we can do is say interface iProps and then specify that we're going to receive a car and it's going to be a type of iCar. And just like our app.tsx component, our car item is going to need to be of type react.fc. So we'll specify the type of react.fc. And one of the things that we saw earlier is that this takes a type parameter, a generic type parameter, for the properties that we're going to receive from the parent component. So inside the car item, we can specify iProps. And then we can specify as an argument the props. And inside here, let's just say h1. And we can specify props.car. And then we have access to the car properties inside our child component. And I'll just specify props.car.color. Now we won't typically specify props inside here. The preferred way to go about this is to destructure what we need from the properties objects that we have here. And all we need from this is the car. So what we would typically do is just specify the car in here, and then we don't need to specify props.car. We can use the car objects directly inside our component. So this is the system that we're going to be using in React. When we need to pass properties down to a child component, we'll typically declare an interface of the type of structure of the properties objects that we're passing to that child component. And then we'll typically destructure what we need out of that component so that we can use it inside here. And then we've got the full power of TypeScript IntelliSense, auto-completion, type safety, type checking, all within our React components as well. And the downside is that for sure there's a bit of upfront code because this would not be necessary inside a typical JavaScript React component. These bits of code here are extra that we write to ensure type safety. But this does normally pay for itself because it's going to highlight any possible typos that we might have as we type them. And we'll get instant feedback that we've made a silly mistake right now, rather than compiling our application, checking it in the browser, finding an error, searching for the typo which is not going to be underlined in JavaScript, and then resolving the problem. One other cool thing about TypeScript that I'll just mention at this moment in time as well is we've also got support for future features in React. And one of the things that we'll use on this course is decorators. Now, if we're just using normal React, then we don't have the ability to add decorator functionality easily because React don't trust it yet because it's only at a stage 2 proposal and is subject to change before it's implemented into JavaScript. But what we can use inside TypeScript is we can simply add support for experimental decorators, and this will enable us to use that functionality inside our application. Now, we will be using those when it comes to MobX because it just makes our code look a bit cleaner, really. But because we're using the TypeScript compiler, then this is going to compile our code into JavaScript. So even though there's no full support for decorators in JavaScript, our code is going to be compiled down into ES5 JavaScript, so it will be perfectly valid working JavaScript code. So this is as far as I'm going with the introduction to TypeScript, and I know this is brief, but we're going to be practicing a lot on this course about what we're doing with React and TypeScript. So don't worry if you don't fully understand TypeScript yet. I guarantee you by halfway through this course you'll be very familiar with using TypeScript and React. And as I mentioned, I'm not saving any of these changes, so I'm just going to literally discard all changes and discard all 4 files, just to go back to where we were before.